Is this an open?
Yes.
Cool. So just reminding councillors, we are now in an open workshop that is being live streamed.
Okay, now that we are in open, I will welcome Brad Olsen and let you carry on with your presentation, and we'll have questions at the end.
Yes, please,
Yeah.
if that's
Okay.
all right. Kia ora and good morning, everyone. It is great to be back with you, particularly in person, despite the fact that at the start of this year, things were certainly looking up, and I was hoping I'd be going around the country and talking up, better economic times in general. We were still overusing the phrase green shoots, but they were actually eventuating a bit more. And of course, at the end of February, start of March, we saw a particularly large difference in our expectations around the economy with the Iran war emerging. And that has meant that momentum we were seeing build in the economy, which was showing through both at a national level, but also here in Porirua, has been sort of deferred, delayed, stunted in recent times. Things are better at the moment than where they were going back, say, mid-April. But when I say better is a relative term. They're nowhere near as good as where they were when conflict didn't exist and when fuel prices were, let's say, more reasonable. But again, we're trying, I think, at the moment to try and figure out how sustained that might be, given that there's a bit of a challenge to reconcile the fact that we're still seeing a ceasefire in the Middle East, despite the fact that there are missile attacks and all sorts still going on at points, and that we're, I guess, still trying to recalibrate our thinking around how all of this crisis starts to affect various prices, activity, and everything else. But I'll take you through some of that, both our what we're seeing in the economy in more recent times at the start of this year, some of the trends around the conflict, and some of our broader thinking, more to give you, I guess, our strategic oversight of how the economy is likely to perform and some sort of specific pressures. But yes, we'll do questions at the end. First things first, fuel prices did go vertical at one point. As you can see from the chart, diesel prices at one point hitting $3.80 a litre. I'm not sure what's scarier, the fact that that was such a high number or that diesel went more expensive than petrol to start with. Very unusual and driven by the fact, or by sort of two factors. One, the type of crude oil that was coming out of the Middle East is different from the type of crude you get from other parts of the world, and so when refineries had to swap to different oil types, they also had to change their refining activities. It cost more. They had to couldn't extract quite as much from what they got. And also that the reason that petrol prices didn't go quite as high as you saw diesel prices is that you can manoeuvre your use around petrol a whole lot more. Households can and will adjust their spending when prices are high. You can't, however, get the likes of your tractor to use public transport or get your heavy truck to carpool. So diesel use a lot more inelastic, can't adjust as much to prices, which is why you saw things spike back up. In more recent times, you can see there that prices have started to ease back a bit. Again, yes, better than at peak, but sort of nowhere near good in terms of the price shock coming through. And we're expecting at the moment for those prices to broadly hold where they are, absent a further sort of massive challenge emerge. We're not so sure how much further they might start to pull back, given there's still a lot of risk and challenge around sourcing oil across the world. We have lost 10 to 20% of actual oil volumes being transported, and although we've been able to run down inventories globally, there's still, of course, a lot of pressure. I just want to touch on how large, in terms of magnitude, over such a short period of time, those changes have come through. You can see these changes here. I've taken it back to 2016. You can go back even further to 2011 on this monthly data for both diesel and petrol prices across the country. The changes you saw in both March and April were the largest ever. Like, they were larger in proportionate terms than what you saw during the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Now, why is that important? Because it means that in our estimation, you might not see the sort of pass-through of those cost pressures as quickly as you might first expect, just because the magnitude of how big those changes were means that people often are unable to immediately adjust themselves from a business perspective. To give you a couple of examples, one transport business we were talking to had been trying to gain a bit of market share, and to do that it was offering sort of fixed prices month on month. And so it fixed its prices in the last week of February for the month of March, and then got absolutely slaughtered during the month of March because it couldn't change its diesel prices that are on-charged. It couldn't put a fuel adjustment factor or anything in, which meant when they got through to April, they had to do even bigger increases sort of out the other side, which meant the actual cost increase only showed through for a lot of clients sort of 2 months after the conflict started. We know that a number of consumer goods and similar often have a minimum 12-week repricing turnaround. So you're not going to see everything increase in price quite as quickly. It's very much going to come through, but it will take a little bit of time. And I guess that the point I'm trying to make here is more, you might not have seen it all yet. Don't lull yourselves into a false sense of security that price increases aren't coming. They are, but they'll just take probably a little bit longer than first expected. We're thinking fuel, of course, has gone first. Then you'll start to see various other oil-related products or transport-related costs come through, and that'll sort of emerge from now until September. And then from September onwards, you'll see some of those other pressures around, say, fertiliser and what have you, that will slowly bleed through into the supply chain too. All of that means we're expecting, again, that inflationary pressure to be more intense heading forward. At Infometrics, we're expecting headline inflation to potentially be 4.8% in the quarter that we're currently in. That's probably a little bit on the high side given where fuel prices are at the moment, but given the uncertainty when we put this together in April, it was always going to be a little bit of a stab in the dark. The Reserve Bank's got an estimate of 4.2% for headline inflation. Whatever it happens to be, it's 4 point something, and it's going to be sort of ugly. I guess important thing there is that looking forward, you can see that after about a year's time, we expect that big increase in oil prices to fall out of the annual inflation numbers. That's why that sort of big block falls out at the start of 2027. That's not because everything becomes cheaper, of course. It's just that you're not adding in the fuel price, which is an annual increase to the sort of next period. But we've also got sort of a more persistent level of inflation than most forecasters out until about 2029, just because we do sort of have the feeling, talking to businesses, that yes, the economy's been weak, yes, it should be harder to pass on price increases, but a lot of businesses' balance sheets are pretty wrecked at the moment, and so they've sort of either got to pass on price increases or they might well go to the wall. And so a real difficulty there around how we cope with price increases is very much a supply shock. It's coming from other parts of the world and it's coming to hit us. Because of that, you've also seen continued expectations that interest rates will rise. That's sort of a snapshot every Friday of where market pricing is. I haven't included the last couple, but they're very consistent from memory with what you can see there. Long story short, everyone thinks interest rates have to go up. Not necessarily because headline inflation is higher at that 4 point whatever level. It's more the sort of second or third round pass-through. Generally speaking, the Reserve Bank can and will look through an oil price shock like this in the short term, but if you see things bleeding over into other prices, and we do expect that to happen, that's where the Reserve Bank will need to respond. Remember as well that even before this price shock, the Reserve Bank was thinking it needed to get interest rates back to about 3%, which is that neutral rate roughly, where they don't think they're adding or subtracting anything to the economy. Now that becomes even more important if they do need to lop off a bit of inflation a bit quicker. And you can see that in the most recent monetary policy statement from the Reserve Bank, where for the first time the committee had a 3-3 split vote between internal and external members. There's a lot of, again, questions being asked about exactly what side might turn out to be right. Hindsight will eventually tell us that answer. But you've got a real competing challenge around part of the bank saying, look, there's still a lot of economic turmoil to come through that might still restrain inflationary pressures, and another side saying if you know where you need to get to, you may as well start getting there sooner rather than later. It gives you more optionality rather than, as we saw during the pandemic, going, guys, prices is not going to be an issue. By the time that it's, guys, prices are an issue, you're sort of a little bit too far behind the eight ball. To be clear, at the moment, market pricing is consistent with an official cash rate of 3% by the end of this year, and we're expecting 3 rates increases before the end of the year, taking from the 2.25% at the moment. The question is how much further might they need to go to lop the top off further inflationary pressures out the other side, because everyone is anticipating more inflation, and generally what happens when everyone anticipates more inflation is that they spend differently, and that generates some of that more inflation. The other sort of difficulty here is these are, of course, expectations for the official cash rate. If you're trying to get a mortgage or if council's trying to get lending at the moment, all of that is costing more already. Wholesale rates have already increased in anticipation. So just because the OCR hasn't increased yet doesn't mean the actual lending costs haven't either. And we're sort of all in the same boat a little bit around the world, that most other central banks that we look at are all doing the same sort of thing. They've hit pause for the last wee while. They're now, I guess, all figuring out who jumps the gun first. At the moment, Australia has done that, given that they've got much more intense inflationary pressures to start with. They haven't cut their official cash rate as much. They weren't able to curb inflation quite as much either, though, and so they've found themselves now having to hike 3 times in the last couple of months. The Australian OCR at 4.35%, we're at 2.25%, and their inflation rate's already over 4%. So, in a sense, the lucky country might well be staring down the barrel of its first recession in 35 years. I'm not saying our approach is better, worse, or otherwise, it's just different. But again, hard to make some of those various comparisons. So let's talk about those pricing pressures, particularly because, as this audience will know well, both from my previous presentations, but also I expect from various insights offered by officers, it's all good and well to talk about headline inflation, but again, if you're a council that's buying bananas, you're an unusual council to say the least, and therefore looking at the consumer's price index is maybe not the most useful figure over time. You can see on this chart, this predates the Iran war stuff, to be clear, but you can just see the sort of importance of looking at the different elements of cost pressures. Got a whole bunch of colourful lines here. Basically anything with a PPI on the end, that's the producer's price index, those are OPEX cost pressures. CGPI, capital goods price index, those are CAPEX cost pressures. Long story short, the cumulative price increase that you've seen over time for a number of important infrastructure pieces have been greater than consumer inflation generally. You'll see the likes of irrigation and drainage, water CAPEX costs, water OPEX costs, heavy and civil engineering OPEX costs that go into maintenance and renewals. All of those have been like substantially 10% plus on top of the CPI average. So again, that pressure's already been showing through, which is why we're starting to monitor some of these various metrics a little bit more closely. Some of you might remember analysis that Infometrics undertook a couple of years back looking at some of these price increases. We found at that time that the price of building a bridge had increased 38% between 2020 and 2023. We're currently just waiting for the June quarter figures, which will come out in August, before we try and do a more comprehensive update of that ahead of sort of engagement going through on LTP in the sort of year ahead. But suffice to say, those pressures have been less intense over the rest of 2025 and start of 2026, and then leapt up from sort of March onwards. I say that because the sort of partials that we do have coming through are fairly brutal. You can see the increase coming through for the likes of bitumen already, up about 20 plus % on where it was a year ago, but up sort of considerably more on where it was at the start of this year. Pressure on fuel prices had come down, and so things were looking cheaper before the conflict, and now have leapt up quite considerably. To my point before around that sort of delay or sort of delay function on price increases coming through, the increase in bitumen prices only showed through, that big spike only showed through for the March month of NZTA's bitumen price index. Didn't show up in May. Didn't show up in March, didn't show up in April, showed up in May. So sort of 3 months into the conflict a little bit, suggesting again that sort of time frame and delay of things emerging. And again, we know that not all businesses are immediately passing things on. They intend to, but they're also just trying to figure out the sort of calibration of how much they try and pass through, how much they try and wear, how much they might sort of wait and hope that the conflict might resolve itself. So those pricing pressures are again remaining quite intense. You'll see that too in terms of plastics prices, and you see this sort of across the board. Going into anything from, packaging through to piping and the likes. Again, plastics prices has actually been in their best position in sort of, nearly a decade at the start of this year. They'd pulled back quite substantially, and then they've recovered all of that increase very, very quickly. Futures pricing that we've looked at implies that there is a little bit less intense pressure like you've seen with fuel prices in the last month or so. So things, if you will, had gone down before the conflict, spiked up massively, and are now easing a touch, but they're easing back to like 80% of the increase that they went up rather than the full 100%. So not a lot of general relief on the horizon, but maybe not peaking at quite, or sustaining the peak to quite the same degree. We know again that these sort of increases are likely to show themselves up in quite a variety of ways. I guess I say that in terms of if council was procuring for pipes directly or other pieces related to, say, road maintenance, whatever, yep, you'll start to see those a bit more directly at some point soon. But anything that's got plastic resin is also seeing that pressure show through. And so we're expecting a bit more generalised pricing pressure emerging, and that's sort of true if you're talking of, say, the plastic packages that you'll get meat from the supermarket on, all the way through to contraceptives and condoms, which have increased by 30%. Like, the pricing pressures continue to expand in areas that you might not originally sort of have thought of. And the final point is, again, just how intense things have been. I know that there were various conversations around water costs and similar this morning. I know that there is transfer coming forward, but just to highlight some of our analysis over the long term, that the increase in water OPEX and CAPEX prices have been more than double over the last 20 years. Inflation's only been a 66% increase at a headline household level. Not saying that's easy or nice, but man, the pressures on water have been just intense. Those are also national figures. So again, when you've sort of seen the demands on Wellington region, both at a general level in terms of funding and potential underfunding, but also for somewhere like Porirua that's been growing quite significantly, again, the pressure on all of that to do all the work has been intense. Let's talk about what we've been seeing in the economy more generally. Funnily enough, when you raise fuel prices significantly and people don't have a magic ability to increase their pay, some sort of hard decisions have to be made around spending activity. What's interesting is sort of how that started to play through. You can see some estimates that we've tried to make based on national publicly available data showing that in both March and April there was a fairly large proportional increase in the total spending on fuel. If you just look at total dollars being spent at petrol stations and similar, up just over 10% in both March and April from the same time a year earlier. The actual price of stuff, the sort of per litre price of fuel, this is averaged across diesel and petrol, had increased significantly. So sort of up just over 10% in March from a year ago, and then sort of getting closer to 40% in the month of April. But that means that if you've had only a 10%-ish increase in fuel spending with those much higher prices, you've definitely been seeing people that have been buying less fuel in terms of the litres, which is where you can see those sort of declines in the volumes towards the end. There has been a notable uptick in public transport use and people that have been looking to work from home a bit more, those who have been thinking about carpooling or otherwise getting to work. But we've also noticed again that because of all of this, households have had to make some adjustments to their budgets. Now, what's interesting is there's been this increase in spending overall on fuel to compensate for the higher fuel prices. You've seen a fairly sustained spending, if not growth, in grocery spending, because again, it's fairly vital and essential. You can't do without food. But interestingly, a fairly sustained amount of spending still on durables, larger sort of one-off items like, say, couches or refrigerators, that sort of stuff. And that seems to be because people have, anticipated spending on that for a couple of months. They've been saving up for it. They still have a conviction they need to spend on those items. Where you've seen the reductions and where people have effectively cut back on stuff to pay for higher fuel has been hospitality, quite clearly, very easy place to pull back on, and also apparel, which says to us that, again, there's this, cut in discretionary spending, but people are sort of making it up on the smaller end of their, or smaller item level of their discretionary spending as well. All of that's also been prompted with the hit to consumer confidence, and I think that's probably a key point at the moment, that we're clearly not seeing an issue with supply of fuel at the moment. We're still seeing monitoring coming through every 3 to 4 days from government around the volumes of fuel. They are stable enough. There's always ups and downs on any given reporting day, but at the moment there's no real worry, either officially or from the context we have across the fuel space around actual deliveries of fuel. So supply is not currently the challenge. The challenge is that things cost a whole lot more, and that's dampening confidence heaps. And I say that confidence one's sort of a double blow. Like, the price is a difficult one in general, but people also go, you know what, those higher prices, they're really going to hurt the economy. They might make it harder for me to get a job. I'm just going to sort of pull back and restrain myself even more than I might otherwise need to build up a buffer. You can sort of see that with the confidence figures here. and that headline consumer confidence in the orange, what people say their current financial situation in the dark blue, and then is it a good time to buy a major household item in the light blue, all pulling back substantially. They're not as bad as they could be, and I think that sort of speaks to the fact that people have been adjusting a bit to fuel prices quite quickly by using other options. But also that as bad as this is, and it's clearly a real challenge, we're not seeing a cratering in economic activity. So it is, again, a real restraint on activity, but certainly not that sort of wholesale death of economic activity and restraint that you saw, say, during COVID. See that as well in terms of how businesses are responding. Again, expectations around employment, investment and profitability all falling markedly. Probably, again, not to the level that we might have originally feared. So it's not good, but it's equally not nearly as bad as we sort of first had anticipated, which is consistent with what we're seeing from other forecasters. In recent weeks, we've had both the Treasury and the Reserve Bank forecasts, which have suggested that, again, tough, but not sort of absolutely outright brutal. What's interesting here is also what it sort of means in terms of the economy going forward. We're not hearing, for example, from businesses that are saying, look, the costs are so high that I'm going to have to cut staff. It's more of I just don't know if I've got the certainty of what the sales are going to look like out the other side. Should I actually bring any person on? I was planning to, but now I sort of might just put that hiring on ice. And so a feeling, again, that lower in employment intentions is not a cutback in employment, it's just not as quick a rehiring of what we were expecting. The same with the likes of investment intentions. We were seeing expectations from businesses a bit more positive about let's put some cash into the economy, let's sort of lower our prices, let's become more productive, let's get some sort of further investment flowing. And now with those higher interest rates and the bigger concerns around sales activity, again, there's just this question of, is now the right time? I don't want to have this sort of big carrying cost over me and maybe not be able to use it. So maybe I'll just run myself a bit harder within the business with the stuff I've got for the time being. All of that then contributes through to a still sort of subdued level of spending for Porirua City. But again, you can see that some of the warm-up and economic activity that was coming through at the start of the year partially showed through. And I say that because our quarterly monitor for the March quarter that we brought out the other week, that's got 2 months of the quarter right that had no real war impact. So don't expect to see huge shifts in that March quarter data because most of it, things just hadn't adjusted quite as quickly. It's still encouraging to see that sort of bit of an uptick coming through. The market view spending data showing a 0.3% increase in spending at the start of the year compared to a year earlier. Yes, there's still inflation in there, and so cost pressures are likely to mean that actual volumes coming out of stores has been a bit more restrained. But by goodness, I'll take a little bit of an uptick starting to show through. So again, momentum for Porirua in our minds was slowly starting to grow again. Certainly hasn't been fast. Porirua doesn't have some of the drivers that other parts of the country have had when it comes to getting things moving quicker. We've seen, for example, parts of the South Island, particularly around Canterbury and Queenstown, have seen that economic momentum improve quicker. And that's been driven by the fact that they've got a much stronger focus on international tourism, but also they've got a lot of primary sector stuff. You've seen that the likes of dairy payouts and similar come through considerably. That will eventually come through for Porirua, but not directly through cow numbers quite as much. It's more the flow on in terms of manufacturing and further demand. So it was always going to be a bit more of a sort of sluggish uptick. You see that as well in terms of the job figures always being the last ones to turn. So despite the fact that we're starting to see a bit of a turnaround in economic activity, you're seeing a bit of a turnaround in spending, jobs activity still remains fairly restrained. And so in terms of the quarterly filled figures, down 1.2% at the start of this year. If you look really closely, the gradient on that decline has started to shift. So up until about mid-2025, the sort of curve down on jobs was a bit steeper. In the last couple of quarters, it's still broadly down, but it's starting to move from sort of straight down to more down to flat, which is that first part of our expected sort of turn. That's also consistent with what we're seeing across Wellington region more generally, which talks to how sort of connected the labour markets are here. And of course, with recent government announcements around public service, cutbacks and similar, that's likely to remain a limitation on getting employment levels back up and will require other parts of the local economy to see that tune up. In terms of what's driving all of that, Funnily enough, at the moment, actually, public admin is up a little bit on a year ago. Now, importantly, if you took this back over 2 years, when the change of government came through, there was a more immediate shock that pulled numbers back. Then there was a little bit more rehiring on, or hiring levels on the quote-unquote frontline pieces, which were a bit more supportive of some roles in Porirua. And then that sort of started to curve out the other side in terms of where we're seeing the numbers there. You've also got that high level of employment showing through for the likes of health, admin, and a little bit on wholesale trade. But again, not necessarily areas that are easy to sort of see general private sector hiring pick up. At the other end of the spectrum is where you see those challenges persist in terms of manufacturing activity remain a bit lower, information and telecommunications activity, transport, rental hiring, real estate. To be clear, a lot of those are not. There's two parts to it. One is that there will be some businesses in Porirua that they're really crushed by higher costs and similar, and so they won't be able or haven't been able to continue operating. For a lot of the manufacturing and probably a lot of the transport as well, it's more a lack of demand to them that means they're not able to do as much. So, there'll be various foodstuffs that won't be being demanded quite as much because consumer spending is down. There'll be hits to, how much manufacturing activity for construction products needs to happen because there isn't much as much construction across the rest of the country. All of that sort of feeding through to lower levels of employment coming through locally. Now, I was asked last year, I think when I presented quite a few questions around tourism, so I've tried to cover some of that off today to give you a little bit of a view. One caveat and health warning is that we are unfortunately at the whims of government agencies when it comes to comprehensive tourism data, and my oh my do they continue to keep changing that. I think we've now had something like 6 or 7 different spending metrics come out of government over the last 6 years or so in terms of how much tourists spend in a local area, and in recent times we've had to actually pull back the tourism spending that we got from government because it just looks a bit sus. So to be clear, caveats abound on the tourism front. I would highlight part of that is that tourism's difficult to measure. It's not nearly as simple as, well, you just sort of count bars, cafes, restaurants, or sort of, other fun bits and pieces. If you guys here who live in Porirua head out to a cafe, it's not tourism. It's just you guys going about your normal daily lives. If I go to a cafe, it is tourism, which means that you sort of can't apportion any one industry fully into things. You've got to sort of split it up a little bit more, which we have done. We've got various estimates, but just noting that there are some caveats within that. First and biggest one is that although Porirua clearly does have a tourism economy, it's not nearly as important of a focus than, say, the national average. Now, again, the national average is skewed by the fact that like half of Queenstown's economy is tourism-based, that Auckland has a big sort of international tourism focus because it's got the big international airport. But you'll just see the trends there over time. I've given you both GDP and job numbers as a proportion of the total economy. The oranges are for Porirua, the blues are for New Zealand, so you can sort of see those differences there. So you're sort of sitting at 2.0% in terms of 2.0% of Porirua's GDP being attributed to tourism in the 2025 year, 2.9% of jobs being tourism-based by our latest estimates. And again, showing a little bit of an improvement or an uptick over time. That's a combination of two things. One, a change in the number of jobs in tourism, but two, it's also a relative shift where when you've seen falling jobs in other industries, they make the remaining tourist jobs look relatively bigger. So important to sort of keep both of those elements in train. If you look over the longer term, you'll see that back sort of in the 2000s that the share of jobs in Porirua that were attributed to tourism were actually larger than where they were now. That's not necessarily because, well, it was technically because tourism was larger, but it's more that the growth over time has been for Porirua in other jobs, professional and scientific services and other things, that's meant that effectively the tourism economy has become relatively smaller, even though it's outright bigger over time. Long story short, you've had other feathers that you've added to the Porirua bow, if you will, in terms of job activity, which I think is actually reassuring. But importantly, this does give you a bit of a baseline going forward to sort of assess how various changes are likely to come through. The other piece is that finally we've got a bit more specific local information on tourism activity local for Porirua in terms of guest night totals. Now, the government runs a large survey contracted through a private organisation called the Accommodation Data Program. To get numbers for a TLA, you have to have a minimum of 6 operating sites, and for the longest time, Porirua had 3 to 4 that were reporting data, so we didn't have anything. You can now see that we have got some estimates coming through starting from November 2024. These are commercial accommodation guest nights, so think of it in terms of people that stay at motels and similar. It doesn't include Airbnb. And other sort of private stay options or short-term residential accommodation and the likes. But it gives you a bit of an idea. Now, I wouldn't take each number and go, oh, well, I care deeply that in January 2025 there were 6,102 people or guest nights staying through. It's more these will give you a bit of a guide and a trend over time in terms of how things are progressing. You'll see that, funnily enough, there's a bit of a sort of summer spike that comes through in terms of traveller activity. The sort of biggest spikes you see are generally around the January month, which is sort of consistent with what you'd expect in terms of people that are either coming home or are travelling across the country a bit more and participating in the wider region. Numbers are still relatively subdued because, again, you've only got 6 sites operating, but it gives you a bit of an idea of how the tourism numbers start to play out. You can see as well that the biggest profile for Porirua's tourism economy is very much domestic rather than international travellers too, which is not too uncertain, but nice to have it backed up with some official figures showing that, again, it's people from outside the region but within the rest of the country that are going to be sort of driving activity. The last one I want to show you is some newer and slightly more experimental data that is starting to be published by government around tourism numbers to try and give us a bit of a guide on people coming through. It's based on cell tower numbers, and so how many phones are connected through to various cell towers, which is both useful and not, depending on your locality. So this chart here looks at the peak daily visitors, so at whatever the peak hour is during the day, and it will change day to day, what's the sort of maximum number of people from outside the area that are likely in the area over time. I've given you both the direct numbers, but also the sort of 7-day moving average for Porirua City. Specific to domestic visitors from other parts of New Zealand, but also short-stay international visitors. Now, the distinction there is that if you include all international visitors, you start to capture people who might be, say, students who are here long-term, or people on working holiday visas or otherwise that have still got their international SIM connected. So we strip them out because that often clouds the numbers a little bit and is not generally who we're looking at. Now, for all of that, you're looking at there and going, wow, there's actually quite a lot of people that are coming to Porirua. Be careful, and this is where the caveat around your area sits. Porirua, of course, has State Highway 1 running through it, which means that it's very, very difficult with any of the numbers to say, did you stop or did you just drive through? Now, I show you this because it still has some value. Now, the caveat there is not to say dismiss it out of hand, but it's also don't take any one particular number and go, that's us. I say that because it does show you that sort of profile over time, particularly confirming that sort of summer boost in people volumes, and that will be a combination of, again, people coming back home and or driving through the various areas to and from, holiday activity, but also does highlight that certainly on that drive piece there's potentially the ability to capture people on the stop through, either, be it for a lunch, a stop off or whatever, breaking up the car trip. So there are various options that I think come through that's based on this. But I did just want to provide elected members a little bit more flavour on what we know about the tourism economy. At some point I'll come back with spending data, but I will wait a little bit until we've really kicked the tyres on that, given some of the difficulties recently. All right, the last couple of pieces that I wanted to go through. The first is just around housing and construction activity, because one, it's important. The rental, hiring and real estate industry is still one of the largest components of the Porirua economy, and of course you have seen a lot of construction activity over time too. To give you an idea, at the moment house prices are still down 0.4% on where they were a year ago and about 20% below their peak. I think that's a good thing, but I also still don't own a house, and so that looks better for me. If you own a house, of course, that looks atrocious. Neither is particularly true, it's different. The biggest trend there is that you look at how long house prices have basically been flat now. For the last couple of years, it really does, I guess, change the game in terms of people's expectations around what they might be buying housing for, and and everything else. So I think this highlights a much greater opportunity around the likes of affordability. I'm not saying that houses are outright affordable, but they're certainly in a better place than before, and that's testament to some of the growth in construction activity and dwelling units in the area too. We're also seeing an increase in housing activity, though, in terms of sales. So although prices are down and not looking likely to move all that quickly, there are actually more people that are buying and selling houses at the minute. And clearly, if they're buying and selling with values on average down 0.4%, they're not trying to just flick stuff off speculatively. There's more of a sort of focus on people that are either moving to the area or changing, where they've been living before. They might be moving out of home. Long story short, that increase in housing sales activity does suggest, again, a little bit more general activity in the economy, and again, that people are moving around. It's not like everyone's sitting on their hands and waiting for something better to come through. There's a general change in activity. We've seen non-residential consents increase as well, up 45% over the last year. To be fair, that's from one of the lower periods that you have if you look at that sort of starting point for 2025. But just good to see a bit more consistency in that level of investment showing through. I'd probably take less stock in the 45% number directly and more stock in the fact that, you're seeing a fairly healthy level of 40 mil of annual investments continuing to roll through. So just providing, again, that consistency around businesses investing. It's not like everyone's going out to do it immediately, but it's not like everyone's sitting on their hands either. And I think that suggests, again, that businesses are probably coy and cautious, but they're still maintaining enough, let's call it latent or underlying momentum. The more encouraging bit is the fact that Porirua consents have now picked up 53% over the last year. So there was a lull, and that was somewhat understandable for two reasons. One, interest rates had increased considerably, but two, locally you'd gone through a huge peak in activity and sort of just a bit hard to sustain all of that time and time again. You've now seen things picking up a bit more, trying to fill in some of that reduction you saw through parts of 24 and 25, and encouraging in terms of providing a little bit more housing options coming forward. Again, double-edged sword, of course, for council. Great to see because it provides more options, also costs you more. Certainly at the outset, which is, I think, one of the difficulties coming forward around resource allocation and similar. Now, all that becomes quite relevant because in the budget we saw the Incentives for Growth Fund being announced, 400 million over 4 years, so 100 mil a year. Looks good on the surface. I don't mind it in terms of it's a start, but let's be clear, it won't provide a huge amount. You'll see there when we've run the numbers based on consents that we've currently got up until the March 2026 year, we've run the figures based on the calculation formula that government has provided in the budget release, and we expect that Porirua on current numbers, if it was implemented on what you've got today, would get about 451k, which is not nothing, but it's not a lot either. And you can see there that only 8 councils get sort of a decentish amount of money at over $1 million, and even then $1 million is again good, but not a huge amount in the capex scheme of things. When we've run the numbers, so we did some of this was, to be clear, 10 o'clock on budget night, so I have looked at it again, but it was interesting because one of the comparisons I managed to do the next day was we'd then calculated what... because the policy right that this has emerged from was originally the coalition agreement between National and ACT for returning GST, some form of GST on new builds back to local councils. Now, when we ran that policy based on the same March 2026 consent figures by local council area, we estimated that returning half of the GST on new builds back to the council where it was coming from would cost around about 1.2 billion total national overall figure, which is about 14 times more than what this figure will provide on an average across the country basis. Long story short, again, step in the right direction, but will it incentivise a huge amount more? Probably not. And so just highlighting that, look, we have done the numbers, that's sort of fairly good estimate. Instead of asking staff to rerun the figures, you can just sort of pick them up from us there, which we were glad to be able to provide. But you will see that again, it really does benefit more of the higher growth council areas, but even then, I mean, 39 mil's a lot, but for Auckland, still not doing a huge amount. And apart from that, you really start to get into fairly small numbers quite quickly. I feel like the Chatham Islands might enjoy the $1,138 they get, but I'm not sure, again, if that will change the game. So the last couple of bits I want to leave you with is sort of the general operating context and how we see the rest of the year going, noting that the crystal ball's pretty cloudy at the moment. It keeps getting kicked around quite a bit. Of course, we've got a ceasefire at the moment, which is good in the Middle East, yet I think one tanker got blown up yesterday, and I'm not quite sure how you maintain a ceasefire when you can also blow stuff up, but for the minute I'll leave that to people more qualified. At the minute, oil prices are also in a more subdued position than the peak. So we're sort of seeing oil prices internationally sitting between the 90 and 95-ish US a barrel mark, which is certainly better over time, but again, not nearly the sort of 60 US a barrel we saw pre-conflict. Our expectation is that over time, those prices are likely to moderate a bit further, particularly if you were to get a deal. But again, even if war completely ended tomorrow in the Middle East, you would have at least 6 months where it would take a while for ships to reposition, to try and get some of the refineries and pipelines and what have you up and running. And some of those have been blown to kingdom come, and they're going to take a good couple of years to sort of reconstitute. So pricing is likely to remain, there's likely to remain a pricing premium on fuel for a while. So I certainly wouldn't be budgeting on fuel prices coming down materially from where they are at the moment. I say all of that because despite that pressure, the primary sector is still adding a lot. I mentioned that before and how that's going to play out in terms of provincial economies to start with. You can see the likes of meat, dairy, hort prices all in a much better position. Forestry is still generally atrocious. It's come up a bit the last couple of months, but again, just demand for our wood products overseas not quite as strong, and the operating cost to do it quite substantial. About 25% of the cost base for forestry is around transport and diesel, which means that at the moment they're really getting hit with those higher cost increases and not being able to push through prices on the other side. Economic activity we expect to still generally grow on average over the year, but that's more because we're expecting that there was good growth at the start of this year. We'll get figures on that in a couple of weeks from Stats NZ. We think the quarter we're currently in has seen a reduction because of that sort of fuel price shock, people spending more on fuel, people spending less on other things, everyone going into their shell a bit more, and then a bit more of a gradual resumption in growth as we head out the other side once that sort of shock factor starts to wear off. But again, you're going to have a level of caution coming through for a period. And you can see that we've lopped out a fair amount of economic activity from our forecasts over the next year and a half, just because of that higher carrying cost that businesses and other operators are going to have to cope with. And then sort of more sustained growth, if you will, from 2028 onwards, although, again, given how challenging the crystal ball is to look at the moment, take the signal there rather than the direct precise number a little bit. As I said before, we're generally not expecting a huge amount more in terms of job losses, which is why we're not expecting the unemployment rate nationally to creep up hugely from where it is at the moment. But we do think that sort of recovery in jobs, activity and hiring and the lowering of the unemployment rate has sort of been pushed out by probably around about sort of a year or so. And so for the likes of Porirua, where local numbers of jobs are down 1.2%, again, we were seeing things start to curve out a little bit more. I'd be hoping that continued in broad regard, but I think again that expectation that job numbers here locally start to tick up is probably going to take a little bit longer to immediately come through. The other part, though, that is providing maybe a little bit more growth, and I don't say this in terms of an upside risk to the economy generally, but more something that Council might well have to consider going forward, is that we have seen a higher level of net migration coming into the country in more recent times, despite the fact that the unemployment rate is higher. So normally, right, we'd expect that when there's not as many jobs, it's harder to bring people in from overseas because there's not as many roles for them to go into. In more recent times, that's been coming through anyway, and we sort of put that down to the fact that there are a number of industries that tell us they still have skills shortages for exactly what they need. Now, that becomes important because Porirua over time has seen a greater level of focus from international migration coming in to the area. So last year when net migration was lower, and you can sort of see that pulling back over the 2025 year. Porirua saw a net 170 people lost from Porirua in terms of international migration, but the year before that, in 2024, you saw an extra 230 people, again, as you were coming off that big tail end of the big boost up. So generally, not fully, but generally, Porirua's population has been a little bit driven by how international migration trends at a national level, and so that little bit more of an uptick does suggest maybe a little bit more population pressure than we might have all anticipated to start with. The final bit that I want to leave you with is that unfortunately the only thing you should plan around at the moment is that your plan is going to be out of action pretty quickly and that something weird, wild and otherwise will come through more consistently than in the past. I say that because earlier this year, of course, Wellington had the first proper state of emergency that the region's seen in 23 years. We are only at the start of June, and so far we've had more days and under a state of emergency and more total states of emergency declared than any other year across the country. Wellington as a region does have one of the lowest proportions of that, which is somewhat encouraging. Maybe we're just more used to coping with it at a more localised scale, but you can see the fairly consistent trend on this chart in terms of challenges that emerge. Be it international tariffs last year, this year with conflict, wild weather that continues to come through, there's a lot of uncertainties that continue to emerge. And so we are generally expecting that a greater need to incorporate some sort of weirdness or buffer into expectations is more important than ever before. On that extremely upbeat note, I wish I could come to you with better numbers. I feel like at some point when we come out the other side I will, but I feel like I've also been saying that now for 2 to 3 years, but it will eventually come through. I'll leave it there except to say that, again, the potential I think is more that the challenges we might have been anticipating probably aren't likely to come through quite as quickly. We have delayed that economic recovery a bit, but we're still expecting that it does show a bit of an upturn. It's just the upturn will be much more slow and sluggish than we'd first hoped for. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brad. Always a pleasure to have you here. I have got Jeff, Moira and then Nathan.
Kia ora, Brad. It's good to see you, bro. I've got 3 lines of inquiry, so if you'll indulge me as I get through this. In your analysis in terms of the global macro situation, obviously there's been a continued uncertainty about the United States' position on introducing tariffs. We've just had another round of that now, and the possibility that there will be retaliatory actions by other partners in this space. Is that something that you've already factored into your analysis, considering that it's part of a narrative that's already been in place, but is it actually enhanced because of further changes in the space?
To a degree, I think, put it this way, at the moment we've seen that we're probably not specifically, say, forecasting, let's say, further tariffs or anything like that. It's more just a general level of economic uncertainty that means that no one's quite as willing to invest or hire or whatever else it might be. So yes, that's sort of baked into expectations. We've been surprised in a sense by how well things have performed generally, and particularly the trade space compared to what we might have feared. We thought that everything might dry up a whole lot more, and it just hasn't. Even New Zealand exports to the US are up slightly on where they were a year ago on a value basis. That's mostly because of beef, to be clear, and because it's costing more.
I'm going to come to that, but yeah.
But I think what you're starting to see is that all our other trading activity is still going pretty well. Like our exports to, say, the EU and the UK are still strong and continuing to rise. Our exports to China are still up and similar. So like a lot of the traditional parts of our growth on the trade front are still going not too bad. What we are seeing is much more sort of sector-specific pressures. So, for example, wine exports are in an awful position at the moment. They're really, really tough. Again, spending's not coming through as much. The tariffs are having a hit, all that sort of thing. But on the whole, like, we have incorporated some of that. What we've been interested in is how little others have incorporated it. So, for example, we watch global growth expectations quite closely every month that come from all sorts of professional forecasters the world over. People seem to be very, very slow at adjusting their expectations. And I do think that part of that is that earlier on, we made big adjustments to our forecast when wild events happened, and then they got pulled back. You know, there was a pause on tariffs, there was a change, there was a ceasefire, and so I think people are now a little bit reluctant to make too big of a change because so far they haven't always carried through. Even the oil price shock, we're sort of, yes, there's a hit, but compared to where we probably started our forecast, the hit is moderated relative to that. So yes, there's a carrying challenge or carrying risk in there, but it's not sort of, we're not wanting to overblow it either.
So just on the beef side of things, I am confused. You might be on top of this more than I am. Where is the current US government's position on opening up the access to beef markets? Because they were going to open it up further, and then they weren't, and then maybe they have, But obviously that has a huge impact in terms of sales. And basically, as your graph shows, the largest growing area of primary production.
So my understanding, as of a couple of weeks ago at least, I think, was that the general expectation is that yes, the US would like more meat and at a more decent price. So you've seen some of the tariffs that have either been rolled back or similar. There is an expectation that some meat products from particularly New Zealand and Australia might fall under a industry-specific tariff once they do the investigations into, say, lamb. We've been waiting for that for weeks, if not months, and it hasn't come through, which I think is somewhat indicative of we don't want to pump prices up even more when everyone's under pressure in the US. But there's general continued protein demand. All of that's in a good space. I think the challenges that everyone's sort of waiting for the other shoe to drop in terms of potential difficulty. So the approach I hear a lot of businesses talking about is let's get as much money out as we can at the moment because things are good, but let's not bank on this being the same thing for the next 5 years.
Yeah, fair enough. Next line of inquiry is around. Today we've had, and this will be a consistent theme with a lot of people over many years actually, where they have come in and they have stated that organisations such as Te Aki Wai now, but previously councils, when it comes to the spend on infrastructure, that they want the costs to the bills to not go up by more than, say, 2%. And yet, the data that you're showing is that for those commodities which are actually essential, those consumables which are essential to those areas are not increasing at 1 or 2%. What do you say to those individuals?
Look, the biggest challenge I think, particularly around water, it's true of infrastructure in general, but let's stick with water because it's a more of a closed system, is that either we make, and I say we, collective we, make decisions around investment into some of these things at an adequate level and get the levels of service you want out the other side, or you will see effectively the decision being made for communities if there is implicit or explicit underfunding of resources, that those resources will not be at the quality or the level that people want. I've seen poo running down the streets of Victoria Street in Wellington. It's not a pretty sight. Those are the sorts of things that you will otherwise see. The other challenge, though, that starts to become clear, and you see this in some parts of New Zealand, including across in the Wairarapa, that where there hasn't been enough investment early on in the process, all of a sudden, we don't have enough capacity to build new houses, which means that the pressure on communities and families to not be able to stick around their own local area or whatever exacerbate out a lot more. Now, am I saying that it's great that everyone just needs to pay a higher and higher carrying cost? No. But that is a little bit of the reality in terms of the services that need to be provided. And the challenge, I think, at a very blunt level, is that if we could go back 20 years and, say, adequately fund things at that point, it would mean a higher carrying cost for those at the time and less of the burden coming through at the minute. Unfortunately, we're not time travellers, and so decisions made previously means that previous residents and ratepayers effectively got a subsidy that is being paid for now by current residents. Not saying that's right, but it is unfortunately the reality. And so the best decision around investment into water is to have done it 20 years ago, and the second best option is today. The minute you delay and defer it is the minute that you sort of make the issues even worse.
Mea tautoko tērā. Now, third line of inquiry, this is regarding GST. Now, I wrote back to you a while back because I was mulling over this particular issue around how councils are always constrained in terms of its revenue generation tools, and that there's always been conversations about taking GST off rates and giving that back to councils. It's not a position I'm particularly impressed with. And then this housing fund that you were talking about is also a very similar mechanism, but again, it only incentivises potentially growing houses at a very minimal rate, right? I'd like you to speculate on whether or not a government of the day is prepared to go down the pathway of a model of GST sharing, whether it's based on per capita, whether it's based on a mixed model, whether it's based on the amount of money that is actually transacted in those particular areas, the trade-offs that are happening in them. Is it time that New Zealand have that conversation in your terms, in your view, or speculate on what you think would be a better model in terms of empowering councils to make better decisions because they are receiving GST around economic development?
It's a lot. Yeah, there's a lot there.
My email last year, I would have been okay, bro. But here we go.
I mean, in my mind, the government does need to look much closer at that. And I think it was interesting because, there was a coalition agreement around this that's shifted back quite significantly. It's definitely not what was in the coalition agreement. I'm going to be pretty blunt. I expect that's because of financial considerations and the fiscal position. But still, we know that councils only receive about 10% of total combined government revenue, and they have to be responsible, depending on the estimate, for 25 to 35% of the infrastructure. So something's got to give. Local government is I think, in a very compromised position. I don't know if there's any one policy that is going to be the silver bullet. I do genuinely think that it depends on where you are. For Porirua being more of an urban centre, but also previously being more of a sort of residential-focused area, will be very different to, say, tourism-based areas, or so considering things from congestion charging or whatever else, and all those other options are important. The likes of international visitor levy, I think, would add a lot back to local investment into services that are being used by, say, tourists and tourist-related areas. Here, given that you do have a big focus on development, the GST sharing would probably be, I'm going to say, a little bit more eloquent. I'm not saying it's the best policy, but you also want to work with something usable. I'll give you the example that when the ACT Party first proposed their idea around GST sharing, it was based on Stats NZ work put in place figures to decide that. Work put in place figures are not developed at a TLA level, so you might well have been lumped in with the wider Wellington region, which would probably suck for Porirua because how you're doing is actually considerably better than, say, Wellington City. So I say that in terms of building consent data is not perfect, but it's maybe the better, more reliable option of all that's out there. The question, I think, probably comes out, the final part of designing this policy, if you will, in my head, is a little bit more of the first principles element of what are you trying to fund? Because the point around, for example, funding a proportion of GST back to areas based on, say, transaction carrying costs in the area is, do we think, collective we, that GST spend, that activity and spending in the area is proportional to the infrastructure load? Does me going into the cafe after this and buying a pie mean that you as a council have to put more pipes in? I'm not sure it does. Directly. I say that because that's why, one, there's a very conceptually difficult ability to figure out how much GST gets spent in a local area, but also that I'm not sure that the sort of, you're trying to use it, right, the GST figure of whatever, as a proxy for use in effect, or for need. Some are better than others, and I think that's where the building consent focus comes down more. It's not perfect, but it gives a little bit more relatability through to the infrastructure carrying load that is likely to be borne by by people coming in here. And that's why, as well, that with the government's focus, it's interesting that they've looked at it in terms of consents as a proportion of total dwelling stock. You often, for example, and this is, I think, a erroneous figure, you'll see various comparisons of consents per 1,000 people. I find that one a little bit hard to reconcile because your consents are effectively a marginal difference, right? It's not looking at all the houses, it's looking at additional houses. If you're looking at additional houses over people that are already housed, it sometimes doesn't make full sense. So, long story short, I think practically something around GST on, say, new builds would be a more elegant solution, not perfect, but a little bit closer to the actual need provision.
I would love to talk more about this, but I know I've got to hold up here, so kia ora.
Moira. Oh, you're good? Nathan?
Yeah, I've got a couple of little questions, and they won't be to the extent of Councillor Hayward's, no offence. you know how to ask a good question.
Are they easier or harder,
We'll
do you
find
think?
out. The first one's going to be quite a broad one, and I may have tapped out for about 30 seconds earlier, so I do apologise. But electric vehicles, around the increase in fuel prices, have you got any data around the increase in electric vehicle purchasing or hybrid electric vehicles? And it's pretty broad, but the impacts in various areas of on the economy.
So I've just looked and my page has just gone down, but I saw it before it flicked away. EV registrations rather for Porirua were down about 50% year on year over the 12 months to March 2026. The difficulty a little bit is that part of that will be because of an earlier spike that was coming through, and again that those figures only include 1 month of the sort of fuel price shock. So I don't have it immediately to hand, but I can go away and come back to you on EV numbers. We did see a real spike across the country, so quite a big lift. I think we saw in the month of March 4 times the number of EVs being registered compared to the same time last year. We saw that across both passenger cars and also commercial vehicles like utes, but that's also true not only of EVs purely, but also I'm going to call them EV adjacent, your hybrids and similar. So the likes of the Toyota Hilux hybrid, 4 times as many of those as normal were registered in the month of March. So there's elements. It's very, very different across the country, though, and it depends a lot on people's starting incomes and the likes of infrastructure provided. And I think that one of the difficulties, particularly locally with some of the pressures that you can see on spending and jobs and similar, is that you had to have 50k minimum sort of thing just sitting around to go and buy that EV, and I don't know how many people necessarily had that. So there's a willingness, and fuel prices will help, but again, it's potentially not the full supply. But I'll go away and find the Porirua figures and send them through to officers.
Thank you, that's awesome. And just another little question. On a slide earlier around the water CapEx spend, there was a massive drop in 2012.
Yes.
Do you know what that was? I'm just
I
trying
do.
to think what it would have been.
No, I do, because we've had to go through it with Stats NZ, and it's ruined the entire series going forward. There was a period there in the March 2012 quarter, June 2012 quarter. One of them, we've got a note that I can supply afterwards as well, where there was a very, very low quote for concrete pipes and pipes in general that were brought through, and that screwed the entire index up. It can't be corrected. We've asked about it. It's a little bit frustrating because it makes the data look a little bit dumb. But yes, that's why. It's because someone put it this way, someone must have had a whole bunch of pipes that they were ready to flick off at a cheap deal, and that meant the numbers came down artificially.
Okay, no, look, thank you very much.
Easy.
Anyone else got questions? No. Thank you, Brad. That was awesome.
Thanks, Brad.
Always
Thank
a
you very
pleasure
much.
having you in. Appreciate it.
Brilliant.
We're now going to move to our economic development strategy refresh. Can I hand him coming up, I assume? Can I hand over to you, Councillor Tron, because I have to leave in 10 minutes with Wendy Walker. So could you chair this one for me, and I'll just sit here?
Can do. Sorry, 1 second. Yeah. Okay, cool. That is all good. All right. So for this presentation, do you want to take this as read and jump straight into questions? Do you want to go through the presentation first? How do you want to do it?
Bit of both.
Bit of both? Okay, cool. All right, so do you just want to get started and we'll just take questions as they come in that case?
Can we do questions at the end, if that's okay?
Questions at the end? Yeah, perfect. That is all good.
Good afternoon, councillors. I appreciate it's been a long session and I'm sure you're wanting to have some lunch. By way of introduction, I'd like to introduce Sean Fremantle and Grace Surridge, who are our Senior Economic Development Advisors here at Council. We're here to talk about the engagement approach to the development of a refreshed economic development strategy. This refreshed strategy will consider how the Council can enable local businesses to thrive, provide access to diverse employment, and showcase our city as a destination for visitors and business. In terms of the broader context setting, we've heard a lot from Brad today. Clearly, economically, there are some issues that we need to be mindful of. This is a refresh of an existing strategy. The last strategy in 2022 had significant external engagement. Many of those themes have been very successful with the focus areas. Regional alignment, there's been a lot of work done across the region with Wellington NZ, with the Wellington Regional Leadership Committee, and with other economic development plans. We need to take those into account. And context, of course, has changed since the last strategy. COVID-19 was a thing. The jobs and labour shortage has since bounced back, but we have existing pressures and new pressures in front of us. In terms of wider alignment, we heard from Brad recently from Ngāti Toa on the ED strategy He Kaianga Ururua. He talked about the key themes of a resilient and economic sovereignty, global reach, local impact, and being connected and engaged. So we need to align with the work of our treaty partner here, as we do with the Wellington Regional Leadership Committee and their economic development plan. We, of course, have our district plan, our city's primary land use tool, and our growth strategy, our non-regulatory framework that helps guide the city's physical development. And then our 4 key strategies within community and partnerships and the economic development aspirations of the same. We have a number of strategies over a number of decades. I've just included 2. The first one there was developed post GFC, when we had global recession. That was really positioning Porirua as a professional paradise. The second one there, where we're going to, was around city centre revitalisation, and the current strategy is all about positioning Porirua City as a strategic partner and responding to what was COVID-19 recovery. The current strategy itself has served us well. We have 4 key focus areas: strengthening partnerships and relationships, connecting education skills and workforce needs, and positioning Porirua City. We'll show some successes there. It is supported by a destination management plan, and that's a strategic framework to help grow Porirua's visitor economy, including through leveraging catalyst projects, and our workforce development plan, and that's a strategic framework to ensure our residents, and particular our rangatahi, are equipped and are ready to work. We need to refresh all of those documents. I'll skip through the economic update. We've just had Brad here, don't need to focus on those. What I will touch on quickly are some of the existing challenges and opportunities. This is important going into the workshop component. Now, these are based on pre-engagement. On challenges, we've heard about jobs for rangatahi. Our young people continue to bear the brunt of the weaker labour market. Average employment rate is 6.2% for the year to March 2026. That's up from the prior 12 months. We're seeing our business units down, unfortunately, compared to last year by 1.4%. And the business resilience, and therefore, is something we need to focus on. In terms of opportunities, growing the visitor economy is an obvious chance here. We have a number of catalyst projects, including the Adventure Park and the proposed Paikakaki to Pahatanui Trail. I'm mentioning these because they exist in the Wellington Regional Economic Development Plan as 2 key initiatives, 2 key opportunities for us. T Gully has obviously been a huge benefit to council and to Porirua residents in terms of our accessibility. We've got regional alignment and connectivity with those plans that I've discussed. And from a culture and diversity perspective, the Porirua story always rings true. Our partnership with Ngāti Toa, they're talking about the home of the haka and Wakahaurua and the opportunities they each present. Developers, how can we encourage developers to do further development here? Each of the 3 main focus areas have had some good success over the last 3 years. They are up on the screen. So strengthening partnerships and relationships is all about bringing forward our business partnerships and relationships. Examples include BizFest last year, back next month. Biz Hub Porirua, our Biz Easy series. Tohoi, we'll be doing a Tohoi in July. We've done a number of foodstuffs, emerging suppliers forums, and One to Some training has continued to be oversubscribed. This is an example quote from one of our recipients of Te Manawa. So we've engaged with 400 plus businesses. The Te Manawa newsletter goes out frequently, and it's clear from this feedback that the work that the team lead here is helping businesses buddy up and learn together. From a connecting education skills and workforce needs perspective, there's some good examples here of how we work in this space around creating greater connectivity and collaboration across the sector and understanding current and future workforce needs. So Porirua Expo, now in its 4th year, Mahi o Rangatahi now in its 5th year, and then partnerships with Partners Porirua and Lafale. Destination management, significant work done here to position Porirua City and to manage us as a destination for living, working and raising a family. Oktoberfest, you've seen the picture. Councillor Hayward's seen the picture. Wellington on a plate. The value for money of these, we're seeing $200,000 in direct spend and $365,000 in direct spend. And that's on the products from those initiatives. There is broader spend from those because, of course, when I take my children to buy Oktoberfest treats, I myself am buying something. Discover Porirua, 4.5 million content views year to date. So some significant work in this space that we're evaluating in terms of which do we carry forward into the new strategy. So the approach will be linked to strategic direction. I appreciate these are still being worked through. It needs to be integrated and aligned with council strategies and plans, the work of Ngāti Toa and across the region. It's going to be a 10-year horizon with a 3-year implementation plan. budgeted alongside long-term plans, and of course positioned towards amalgamation. Now, government partnerships for Te Akiwai, NZTA and Kaianga Ora are key. There's impact maximisation opportunities here around employment, local procurement, local workforce, and government-funded infrastructure. So we keep very close to those.
Can I just very quickly, sorry, noting that Mayor Baker has to duck out in a minute, are there any comments you want to make before you go? Or no, okay, cool, that's all good. Just wanted to give you the chance. Please keep going.
Thank you, Chair. Flying here. Key products are going to be developed. There's a refresh of the strategy that includes the work programme and then a refreshed destination plan and workforce plan. We will have the comms and engagement plan. The asset experience and investment plan, our asset management plans are inputting into that document. This is the view of our assets from a destination and visitor management position. Okay, on to the engagement approach. This is based upon the IAP2 spectrum of public participation. So our engagement methods there are well known, and they are consistent with the engagement levels of whether we want to collaborate, engage, consult, or inform. And we have key strategic engagement groups to help us with our engagement methods. So where we have programmed engagement, where we have programmed activities, we will utilise those. BizFest, Tohoi. We went to the Porirua Business Pacifica funnel a couple of Saturdays ago, Sean and I. We have BizHub Porirua every other Friday. Love Local is just around the corner. Pacific Night Market end of June. And then from an informed perspective, our newsletters and council website. In terms of those engagement groups, Ngāti Toa right up front is our EB partner, our strategic partner, but also Wellington NZ, Te Matara o Māori, Wellington Pacifica Business Network. These are our foundation partners to BizHub. We work with them every day and need to be spoken to accordingly. This is not an exhaustive list. We've got some key businesses up there, some key industry sectors, workforce, of course, and developers. And one note I am missing here, sorry, is the developers in the Northern Growth area. So we'll have a developer there as well. And those will come through to Tohoi. And then, of course, small to medium businesses. Timeline, I'm just going to focus on phase 2 engagement. Post Best Council workshop, we will commence that core engagement phase. We will then focus on the engagement themes, which will then lead into the strategy development. And we'll come back to you for a workshop on 29 October, all things going well, with some refined themes and opportunities and actions to discuss to hopefully bring back to you in December for a completed refresh strategy. We, of course, want to use this opportunity to speak with your good selves, to understand what's important to you as we go out the door and engage with our community, with our businesses, and with our partners. I'm going to look to the chair now to lead this conversation.
Brilliant. Yeah, so two ways we can do this. Do you want feedback on all 4 of these questions all at once, or do you want us to go through these one at a time?
What we'll work with...
How about we go through one at a time so we don't get a bit scrambled? Or I'll tell you what, I'll let Jeff go first, and while he's going, everyone else can figure out what they're going to say. So that's perfect. Over to you, Jeff.
Thanks, Peter. Thanks to the team. A lot of touch points that were in your presentation resonated strongly with me. So thank you for the opportunity to speak on the direction of travel. One thing that I am mindful of is that the timing of this needs to also feed into the potential of the LTP. Obviously, there's a lot of strategic focus that you're putting in there. Is it the expectation that if there's any additional incentives or initiatives that will come into the conversation around LTP?
Yeah, through you, Chair. This is all based upon the existing budget in the current LTP, okay. And at this time we're not foreseeing any new initiatives. It's important to us to work with an existing baseline, existing FTE.
I'd love hearing that. Obviously, a lot of this is external focus, but what is there space here in terms of the internal focus, in terms of those areas where we have commercial relationships, the procurement and social procurement components of that?
Through you, Chair, absolutely. Social procurement, procurement more broadly is something that is already being discussed through our treaty partner, Ngāti Toa. They've got some initiatives in that regard. Procurement is an obvious opportunity for us to understand how can we keep money in the economy, in Porirua. But I appreciate the procurement framework we have at Council is something that goes back through Council. But there are obvious opportunities there in terms of employing local supplying local and understanding where those broader outcomes provide benefit.
Okay, so I'm going to return to my feedback with regards to the direction of travel. In terms of the content that's been covered in the slides, in terms of tactics, IAP2, you know they say sweet nothings in my ear. Notwithstanding all the specific groups of engagement, the types of treatments for engagement, and the overall approach, which I am happy with what's been stated in there, and knowing that some of those groups that are going out to are not exhaustive, I would have suggested perhaps you may want to talk to the living wage movement in terms of ensuring that any participation that we're working with local providers are also meeting the same expectations that we place in terms of the remuneration of individuals. But I felt that it should be made clear that in terms of how we front foot this, I feel that there is a need for a more explicit focus in that social procurement space. We have rules and we will constantly refine them and update them as possible. Ngāti Toa obviously have expressed a very a firm interest in this space as well. I think there's an opportunity that perhaps the two largest institutions in Porirua, with the way that they focus and can serve as a lightning rod for all of the other organisations that we are working with. And so by front footing that explicit approach is, I think, vital. Further to that, we have, as a council, maintained a very strong commitment to trying to reduce NEAT, especially for rangatahi. And I think that also is a particular area that we can both demonstrate our long-term commitment, but also go further and explicitly front-footing that sort of stuff as well. So I think that should be the kind of things that we should be focusing front-footing. I use this phrase at the bottom here, build our own future. It probably sounds like a political campaign slogan at some point, but that being said, it still is the kaupapa that I think is appropriate for Porirua. That would be the feedback that I'd give you for that. Kia ora.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you very much, Jeff. All right, Councillor Lawler.
Kia ora, thank you. Yeah, there's a huge amount of work in here, and I think it's a huge amount of work that's already happened. I think that I think the strategy so far looks incredibly effective. The numbers are really impressive. I guess I had a question for Brad, but I didn't want to prolong the conversation. But there was a graph that talked about industry investment, and it made me wonder, because he said, oh, it's good, industry investment is up. But I wondered whether that's off quite a narrow base, because, when we look at our list, I suppose this is speaking to one of our challenges, when we look at our list of big industry players, it hasn't changed that much over time. So I wondered if you had any thoughts about that. And I wondered in terms of our strategy, because one of our objectives is to grow businesses. Are we trying to grow any particular kind of businesses? Are we sort of targeting any particular sectors?
Thank you, Councillor. Sean, you want to have
Through the chair, maybe I can answer that. That's the kind of question that we'll be asking when we go out with these questions to the community. So we're open at the moment. We don't have any preconceived ideas. But largely, Porirua has a history of being an industrial area. Science, education actually are other big employers. Arts and recreation actually are big industries here as well. But no, we're not targeting any specific area.
Thank you. So in terms of the questions, I think our strengths are, one of our current strengths is the expansiveness of Ngāti Toa's economic development approach at the moment is a massive strength for the city. And I think kind of a softer thing, but one of the advantages of our long-standing businesses is we have quite a relational approach. People like Whittaker's are a very value-focused company. They're not a kind of cut and thrust, get in, get out kind of company. So I think that's an advantage for us in terms of the collaborations we can build. We can council make its biggest impact. I think it is around backboning those collaborations, encouraging those businesses to get around a table and think about how we collectively grow Porirua's economy, which clearly you're already doing. Challenges and barriers. I think youth unemployment is a very real concern because it has such a long tail in terms of its impact in the city. And I know there's already heaps of people working in that space, but I do wonder about collaborations that involve MSD and Whitireia and others to try and really wrap around some of those young people in a very bespoke way, because, you know, that's going to haunt us if that carries on for too long. And I think maybe that's it for me. How can it make a difference? What does it need to achieve? I mean, I think ideally the economic development strategy has kind of joint ownership, that all of our key partners can hold it up and promote it and explain what's in it and feel like it represents what we're collectively trying to do, rather than saying, oh yeah, council did that thing over there. So that's critical for me. The only other kind of smaller thing under the surface is the district plan connection. And I think we asked the team that do our kind of quarterly reports to start reporting on brownfields development separate to greenfields development, because there is a connection. Like if we're trying to revitalise our city centre, we want people to bring residents into it. So perhaps within council a little bit of contestability about how we really ensure that that happens. Kia ora.
Through you, Chair. I haven't included the internal engagement component, but that's a given with those key teams, yes.
I've got Kathleen and then Ross.
I like that, Moira. Brownfield one. Okay, so where can council make its biggest impact? The first thing that comes to mind is, and it's already sort of been shared, is that when we spend our money, whether it's through outsourcing, whether it's through catering, roading, whatever it is, plumbers, all that sort of stuff, that the biggest impact will be if we spend our money on local businesses delivering those services and goods. I think that's where we can really put our, what is the saying? Put your money where your mouth is. Key challenges and barriers, just talking to that point and I'm just shooting from the hip here, would be just how things have always been, and there's sort of the system blocks, and you guys would probably know more about that side of things. So an opportunity which Jeff has sort of alluded to and Moira is, working with those organisations like Te Ahuru Mowai, Ngāti Toa, who have a circular economy policy within their procurement. That was it. Thank you. Yeah, I look forward to hearing what comes back too.
I've got Ross, then Hemi, then Nathan.
Thanks for this. Seeing all the stuff laid out is quite impressive in terms of what we do and bangs for buck. I guess the comments I would have is that for council, economic development's always a really tricky thing for councils. You can spend a hell of a lot of money for not much coming out of it. But for me, council's biggest impact should be around the area of making it as easy as possible for businesses to do business in Porirua. That's alluding to our planning rules. It's ease of consents, dealing with people in council, not putting up barriers, but looking at opportunities and making things happen. We need to be the catalyst for that sort of thing. We don't want to take over the role of a business association. I'm teaching my grandmother to suck eggs here. But I just wonder whether you'll include, and you're talking to people about, do we have a good understanding of why businesses locate to Porirua? And making something of those sorts of things in terms of promotion and the things that we do. I'm not, and I've said this before and also to the Chief Executive, I like to concentrate in economic development or think about concentrating on existing businesses that are already here and helping them to grow. I'm not a fan of, we do quite a lot of this, let's have startups and all the rest of it, given the number of failures in those sorts of businesses. I'm not saying don't do it. I'm just saying that's where I'd like to put an emphasis. I'm not. People will disagree with me on this, no doubt. I'm not a fan of. I hear the social procurement thing, and I'm all a fan for it. But I don't think we should be too inward looking. We need to be aware of what's happening around the place, and also, the whole area. I'm thinking of amalgamation and how things are going to look going forward as well. Yes, social procurement, good thing, but we have to think of other things as well. What else? Talking about small business and things like that, business numbers. I'm not so worried about business numbers. I want to see businesses grow stronger, be more profitable, and expand. That's the sorts of things that we should be measuring, not the fact that 50 new businesses have started. It's about how good those businesses are. And the other thing around young people, I mean, we know, I mean, we have partners, Porirua. I see quite a lot of work going on in that whole young people area, and a whole lot of organisations, schools and others, Ngāti Toa and the rest, trying to concentrate on that. It's quite an intractable area in some ways. But I commend the work that we're doing in that area, and would want to see that continue to be supported. That's about it from me.
Hemi.
Thanks for this. I'm trying to word my question here, and it's probably a dumb question, but under the strategic objectives, where it says connecting education, skills, and workforce needs, is professional sports or a professional sports player considered as an economic focus?
Through the chair, yeah. Anything that has a economic driver, employment, attractions, major destination attractions, sporting facilities, anything like that has economic output as part of it.
I just see nothing here to do with sports, but I can think of a lot of barriers, I guess, in that department. And we heard from Kylie last week in terms of netball, but I can speak on behalf of rugby too, where we see, especially for a city so young and so many players of the sport. You see so many people leave Porirua to play somewhere else. For example, Tawa and others. But 2022, Norths win Jubilee Cup, and no, that's right. And then 2023, they're kicked out of their home, and I don't even think they made the second round that year. And obviously, there's the financial pressure of having, I think it was the FIFA tournament there, and you can't really argue with that. But I think that's a huge barrier. This is our home team. This is our home club. We, the likes of TJ Perenara and Karifi Duplessis, and then also the legendary Jerry Collins, who our whole city has backed. And I still remember the day where we marched the streets of Porirua in the east. I've never seen a bigger gathering in Porirua. This is their home, and we kind of kicked them out straight after they won the Jubilee Cup, and that's a huge barrier for me. So when we consider that sports and the future of our young looking to aspire to become professional sports players, but say that, hey, here's your home until something else pops up. Yeah, just the uncertainty of having a home club would have had a big impact on why they didn't do so well the next year. But just a comment around sports and professional sports.
Through the chair quickly, Councillor Fermanus, thank you for that. There is a second piece of work that's part of this, that's the destination management plan that has all of our sporting hard assets investments in that. Pete will be able to talk to that in more detail.
Yeah, thank you, Ruben, through you, Chair. I also want to talk to the fact that sports as a sector is on the plan. We're actually catching up with Sport New Zealand and Nuku Order this afternoon. And post this engagement, we will start to have that conversation in terms of how do we amplify that space. It's also worth noting we have had initiatives such as the Chiefs Hurricanes friendly warm-up at Porirua Park, and more recently the Phoenix semi-finals. So, where we have opportunities to really celebrate our teams and showcase Porirua, we will take those. But absolutely, we have the asset management plans, we have the asset experience and investment plan. How can we look at our existing assets, modify them, maintain them, and ensure from a visitor lens, from a destination management perspective, and from a sports perspective that we absolutely get back bang for buck. But your comments are noted. Thank you.
Cool, thank you.
I've got Nathan, and then I'll come back to you, Moira.
Yeah, thank you. Just following on from Hemi's comments, I think we can't forget about Parramatta Plimmerton as well. They are within our city. Tawa is not in our city, but they're our friends to the south Porirua. I also, speaking of sport, you've got to think about hockey as well. We've got one hockey turf in the city. It's it needs a good look at, but that's there's many a sport we haven't got a good grass cricket wicket in the city anymore. They don't play international cricket on artificial. So that's the potentials for growth in all sports around the city are should be encompassed within loosely our economic development strategy. To get to your points or your questions here, I haven't got too much. I've got one question. How's our relationship with the Chamber of Commerce post not funding?
Through you, Chair. Sean, would you like to answer this question, or I can answer it? Okay.
Through the Chair. Sorry. We have built a relationship with the new CEO at Biz Central, who had the contract essentially for Porirua Chamber of Commerce. So we still have conversations with them. There's nothing we can do as a team in that space, but we've just built the bridge, and at the moment the chamber is not operational.
Thank you, Sean, and through you, Chair. It's worth a note we have Biz Hub now every other Friday, and we continue to invite the chamber representatives, of which some come regularly, which is helpful, and then we continue to have open conversations. And to Sean's point, we're actually catching up with the CEO of Biz Central this Friday, tomorrow. So the door is very much open to understand their needs and our direction and how we continue to advocate this locally.
Just through the Chair on that note, we did defund them. We don't have any plans of reinstating that funding. They are still delivering programs, they say, through the Wellington Chamber here in Porirua, but also looking ahead in terms of amalgamation. We might want to think about how we were more regionally connected on those kind of chamber programs.
No, thank you for that. Look, my only feedback on this would be, you highlighted resilience as a part of one of those key pillars. Obviously, one of the pillars of the 4 was COVID. I mean, what was going to be next? It was Ukraine war. Now it's the Iran war. Yep. What's next? I think there's always going to be the next big thing. So I think resilience is the key solution to that problem. And just to follow on from my questions around the chamber, connecting businesses, and you've got that highlighted in there. I think us as the bridging agency is really key to driving success of our businesses and our economy. I think being able to be the people that businesses can come to, or small at home businesses can come to and say, I need some assistance, and we being the team that can connect that is really key. So all in all, I think you've got a really good strategy here to consult with the wider community on.
Thank you, Councillor.
Got a couple of round twos. I've got Moira, Ross, and Kathleen.
Yeah, sorry, I'll be quick. Just picking up on Hemi's point about sport opportunities, looking at it the other way, maybe in conversation with Sport New Zealand, there's also the opportunity for a cluster around career pathways in sport for young people, because you think about like the Ngāti Toa basketballers who end up in Hawaii or we've had gridiron scouts and Porirua scouting young people for gridiron. Like there's a whole kind of, I know it's small, but it's still high value for those families involved in terms of sports pathways. So I guess that's another, like turning the telescope round the other way.
Through you, Chair, just noting the regional spaces and places strategy that came to council just a couple of weeks ago, that wasn't linked here, and it's a key strategy to look to as well. So I think.
Oh, I just, can I ask a question? I have talked to Wendy about this before. I think it would be a good idea, and maybe it's happening already, if both the chief executive and the mayor and others, perhaps, had a regular round of visits with employers and others so that they can listen directly to feedback.
Noted. Thank you.
Kathleen.
This actually follows on from something Ross said. So he mentioned around potential, well, not blocks, but things that can be a barrier, like, the consents and that sort of stuff, which is, I guess, a direct impact that council can have on a business. But in terms of indirect impacts that we can also have, parking comes to mind. And so, I mean, I'm just wondering if this is an opportunity to hear from the businesses, to hear particularly the ones where they are in the, outside Common Court area, how they have been impacted by paid parking, and I don't know if they have ideas. Was that something that you were thinking of doing, or?
Through you, Chair, that will naturally come through as sentiment, I think, from our businesses and from our retailers and from our shops. As we engage with them, we're open to receive feedback on any and all council policy. I see Ruben's got a point.
Through the chair, actually on the 25th of June, we've got our asset management managers coming up, and parking will be part of the asset management discussion. Not specifically the parking strategy, but part of that broader thinking around how we promote Porirua as a destination, and if we are a destination, where people are going to put all those cars. So it's a bit of a growth planning there, but it's not specifically about parking, this program here. So
yeah. So it's just further for that. So parking is obviously a hot potato on a number of different fronts. What we're doing right now is we're using those, we're collecting some evidence. We haven't got enough evidence and data to give you a good idea about where we need to head to from a policy perspective, but we are working on that and intend to bring to you a draft parking policy for consultation later on this year. And ED will absolutely be a part of that.
Okay, that's good. Thank you.
All right, that looks like everyone. I just, for me, quickly, I don't have a whole lot to add, to be honest, beyond what has already been said. I'll try to keep myself to things that haven't already been gone over. When I'm thinking about strengths for Porirua, one of the things I think about, and I'm not even sure exactly what direction we take this in, but it's something that I'm conscious of. We talk about Porirua as being a dormitory suburb of Wellington, and traditionally how that hasn't been necessarily great from an economic perspective, but ways of work are changing. People are working from home more. I suspect that's only going to continue trending in one direction. In the past, when we've talked about boosting economic activity in Porirua, it's mostly been about how do you get more people into the CBD, and actually that doesn't necessarily have to be the conversation anymore. If you've got people sitting at home in Whitby and Titahi Bay working from home, working in Porirua, so what has once been a weakness is actually potentially a little bit of a strength. So that's something that I'm thinking about. Impacts from council, procurement, yes. Agree with all the comments around that. But actually, probably not Ross's comments, but all of the other ones. But I also think about the opportunity we have for resetting the way that council works generally through this process we're going through at the moment. Establishment of Te Aki Wai, amalgamation. Next step beyond procurement policy actually is a serious discussion around insourcing. And that's something that I'm thinking about. I think that's the next step up. There's potentially opportunities there. Key challenges and barriers. This is one that you're not going to be able to do anything about, but I'm really worried about economic tailspin. We have a huge number of public servants that live in Porirua. And at the moment, not only have we had a bunch lose their jobs and a bunch be told they're going to lose their jobs, that uncertainty means even those that are going to keep their jobs are going to be more careful with their money. That means discretionary spending goes down. That has flow-on impacts into the private sector as well, and it spirals round and round and round. All those things that people treat as the real discretionary stuff, buying a coffee out at the cafe, those sorts of things, that is going to trend downwards. And Porirua is going to be hit harder than that than most areas. So that's the biggest challenge I'm thinking about. Of course, there's absolutely nothing that anyone in this room can do about that, but it's just something that I'm very cognizant of. I think everything else I would have had has been covered off by other people. So last opportunity or wrap up by one. We're all good. Thank you very much. Excellent. Okay, we will move straight through into closing for our karakia.
Toru whā.
Kia
hora te marino.
Kia whakapapa
Au
pōnamu
namu te moana. E huarahi mā tātou i te rangi nei.
Aroha atu.
Aroha mai.
Tātou i a
Ia tātou
tātou.
katoa.
Hui e tā.
Ai ki e. Awhatai, everybody.
Sorry, I should have
Whā.
mentioned we've postponed